Hey everyone, Scott Hansen here from NFL Red Zone. I hope you're checking out 1 hour of 5 Yard Rush, one of the best podcasts on NFL football in the UK.
Yo, what's happening, Rush Nation? It's Thursday, and that can only mean one thing. It is the flagship show. It's round about 7 o'clock UK time. Sorry for being a little bit late. That tardiness is on my part. And as per usual, I'm joined by the big man himself, Murf. How we doing, brother? Another week, a whole week on from last week's show. Still so much to get into. You good?
I'm good. Constantly improving. I put my watch on, activity watch. I've managed to do 8,500 steps today, which is a massive improvement on what I could do even a week ago. So, in continuing to improve in health. If I got drug tested by the NFL, I'd be due a PED violation. So, only for another week or so. I come off the roids. Tomorrow's my last day on the roids. So, I'm looking forward to getting off those. And that'll be the next stage of my recovery to see how I continue to do on less medication. But so far, so good, man. Every day I get a little bit stronger. I get a little bit better. So I can't complain. I can't complain at all. So I'm looking forward to getting into this because, we did a lot of stuff last week. A lot of it wasn't planned, and got some really awesome reactions to it about groupthink and then this need of consensus and following consensus and building similar teams to other people who you're competing against and following consistent advice. So I'm looking forward to I feel like we've dispelled a bit of that and given some advice, take some of the lessons of 2022, and then also going to cover this concept. It's something I talk about a lot, but something that I don't think I've either explained very well or people are struggling to concept with, which is this concept of a vertical and horizontal board. So I'll get into that using my employer, Fantasy Pros' mock draft simulator. Other good mock draft simulators are out there, apparently. And also, by the way,
there you go. I would like.
Hopefully, there's others out there with these.
Yeah. So if you're not watching, come over to YouTube again, hit the bell and like, subscribe, and then you get notified when either us or the Dynasty Show goes live. Another good reason, because you're missing out on content. Because if you're listening, Murph just held his Listener League T-shirt up to the camera. It's looking pretty sweet, my man. Note on that: if you didn't receive your Listener League T-shirt, please do let us know, because there was some sort of issue with the postage where quite a lot of the labels appear to have come off the parcel.
Yeah, mine did. Luckily, my postie was intelligent enough to look at the shipping label and deduce the postcode and the number, and said, I think that's yours.
So when I went to the post office, it took the guy 45 minutes. I had 16 to send. It took the guy 45 minutes to process my 16 parcels. The queue behind me was, the only way I can describe it, hellacious, because this guy was going so slowly. And if you haven't sent anything at the post office, you need to get a QR code printed behind the desk to put onto the parcel, as that's their sort of shipping stamp, instead of putting a first class stamp on whatever. And he was ramming the parcels into this bag so tight that I'm not surprised if everybody had another label on the back that was from the previous parcel, because it was just stripping I'm sure it was stripping the labels. And I did ask him to be careful, and he said, "Oh look, I'm in a real rush." I said, "No, I appreciate that. Just, these need to get to where they're going." So I hope everybody has received them. I haven't had anybody say they haven't, and a few people they said they have. So fingers crossed they all got to where they needed to go.
Yeah, I'll start messaging some people later on in the week. I literally got mine the other day, so give it a couple of days, and I'll reach out. So if you haven't reached out to me, you know where to find me, and we'll go from there. But yeah, fingers crossed. They're sweet. They're very good, very comfy. I've worn mine all day. Wore it on a work conference call. Someone commented, "Oh, that looks sweet." And I was like, "You should enter the leagues." Can't now, because just to know, all the Listener League entries for 2023 are full. I'm not doing any more leagues in 2023. I'm not starting any more leagues. So that is it. All the Listener Leagues are full. They're going to start drafting. First one starts Saturday, and I think they're going to be sort of rolling starts over the next sort of week to 10 days after this weekend. So, looking forward to kick those off for 2023. Thank you to everybody who donated money towards our charity partner for that, as well as also those who played in the FFCC and donated. We're a little over £5,400 raised, which is a phenomenal amount of money. Hopefully by the end of the FFCC, we'll get it to £5,500. That's kind of my goal. And then there'll be some mid-season elimination leagues, which did last year. Hopefully we can raise another couple of £100. I think that'll be us for the year. But phenomenal amount raised. I got an email from the charity today, really blown away by the generosity of all of you. So they say thank you very much.
Yeah, bravo Rush Nation and bravo Murf. You've done the donkey work with that, so congratulations. Rush Nation, if you are an audio or a visual OG, you'll know that when was it now, Murf? 2 years ago?
Probably a couple of years ago.
Yeah, we were lucky enough to be sponsored by Manscaped. I'm pretty sure that if you listen to any form of podcast, you will have heard the adverts for Manscaped and their lawnmower series. And once again, Manscaped have reached out and they've asked us to advertise the lawnmower 4.0 on the flagship. So Berth and I absolutely said yes, because we received the product before. Not a spoiler, I guess. We do not have a second lawnmower 4.0 because we don't need an Edward Scissorhands situation where you've got one in each hand and you're just going bananas on the body hair. But having a grooming process, Murph, I don't know, obviously you have a beard. We regularly know that your beard was trimmed by the barber before lockdown. Did that obviously changed in lockdown? Has that process gone back to normal? Has your grooming changed at all since lockdown? And is the lawnmower still, I'm assuming, a regular part of your grooming process?
Yeah, I use the lawnmower 4.0. I actually, spoiler, don't use it on the beard, but I do use it pretty much everywhere else. So neck hair, back hair, and other parts of body, chest hair. Not all my chest hair, just some areas that grow longer than others, and it's quite irritating. And other parts of my body, which I use, because it's always good just to be in good nick. You want to look good for your lady, especially. And, you know, I like to keep things, you can kind of tell. I'm not a uniformed kind of guy, but I don't like things to get too crazy and get too out of whack. And especially like these areas here, which are on show, I always keep these quite tight. I make sure I don't have straggle hairs because they itch and they're uncomfortable when you roll your hair. You've got bits everywhere. And then the same goes with parts of your body as well. So, and also to reduce chafing. So you just want to look good, feel good. And I know, especially with my health challenges recently, that if I don't look good, I don't feel good. And I haven't felt good for a while. So just doing those little habits of grooming do give you that sort of mental health boost and make you just feel that little bit better. And especially when you're not feeling 100%, like I haven't been recently, or even if you are, it just gives you that little 5%, 10% boost of feeling a bit better. And who doesn't want to look good and feel good?
Absolutely. Confidence is key.
Yeah.
It really does help. And that's where the Platinum Package, Lawnmower 4.0, comes into its own. It's the one-stop shop for the man who deserves it all. They designed this package to allow you to fully align your entire hygiene routine with elite products. So that's head to toe, whether it be stinky feet, bad scalp. The guys at Manscaped have got you covered. This is so fresh in the inbox. Murph and I actually don't have a code for this yet, but we will be hitting you up soon, I should say, not quickly, with a code for a discount on the Platinum Package. And I'm assuming, Murph, is it just the Platinum Package, do we know, or is it going to be on the lawnmower itself?
I think on all products over a certain amount, there'll be a 20% off code.
Yeah, 20% off and free shipping. So when we get that code, you'll have it. That is the 4.0 lawnmower. Get involved. Keep yourself tight and right, Rush Nation. Talking of tight and right, let's finish off the 2022 lessons that we got from last year, Murph. Where did we get to? Because we went severely off-piste real early. Where do you want to start today on this, Doc? You lead off and then I'll follow.
Yeah, I think we did running backs quite convincingly. I think we spent a long time talking about running backs and how they've become almost a value this year from being overdrafted and people being scared. So I think it'd be pertinent to probably start with... let's wrap it up. It's just two... Yeah, let's do kickers. Let's do the audience. The one thing I would say, just to wrap it up, is running backs. People were too worried about some of the really boring choices, and I say boring in a nice way. With Josh Jacobs, Miles Sanders, and David Montgomery, not sexy appeal players, but players that massively outperformed ADP last year. Miles Sanders was someone I talked about a lot last year as a player who my touchdown regression model absolutely loved. That he was someone who was going to regress back to the mean in touchdowns, and actually would have been an RB2 the previous year had he had the mean amount of touchdowns that we kind of expected. And that's what happened in 2022. He rebounded nicely by regressing almost to the mean in touchdowns. So that's kind of my point, that you have these players who don't quite get, they're just desserts on points, but actually are worthwhile. Josh Jacobs absolutely smashed ADP. He was almost a league winner for a lot of people with the way that he put up big numbers. A lot of people didn't like it because the contract situation. He wasn't being given a new contract. His fifth-year option was declined. People didn't think he was going to remain with the Raiders. He played himself into potentially more money. He hasn't quite transpired that way, but obviously the guy's playing for his next job, so he had that extra incentive. And David Montgomery had a very quiet but very sneakily good year. And these players that perhaps are a little boring, don't really excite, just sort of average their 4.3, 4.4 yards per carry, but get carries, are highly effective. So don't sleep on the quote unquote boring players. Look at those as opportunities to gain significant points if you get good ADP value on those, like all three of those guys returned. David Montgomery was another player who I talked about last year as a player who was a significant value. That's it, I think, for running backs. I think we've kind of done them to death. So
before you write that off completely, Murph, two of those three players, Sanders and Montgomery, are obviously new situations this year, and their ADP is still low. So it was low last year when we knew their situation. It's low this year when we don't know their situation based on we have no historical data to go on with their teams they're currently on. Are they still too low because of we know the production they are capable of doing? Or is there baked in worry because of the new situation?
It's a really good question. They're very different situations. Miles Sanders has gone to Carolina to be the lead back. He's got a rookie QB, but he has very little competition for touches. Chuba Hubbard. I like Miles Sanders at ADP. Think he's a good value at his ADP currently. I think, again, he's a player who's severely underrated by fantasy players. Maybe fantasy players have been burned by him in the past and don't like him. But I look at the situation that he's in with the coach that he's in, the coach he's got with Frank Reich, who, let's not forget, a couple of years ago led Jonathan Taylor to an RB1 season. So we know that he does value running the ball. He doesn't mind using a workhorse back, as we have seen. So I think Miles Sanders is a value at ADP. David Montgomery, I think, is a value at his current ADP, but it's a very different situation. He's going to be behind Gibbs, we would assume. But having said that, Jamal Williams was a very, very effective complement to DeAndre Swift last year. So we know that this current coaching staff have no problem running two lead backs. The good thing about Detroit, so this Detroit offense likes to run a lot of plays. So effectively what they do, a lot of hurry ups, a lot of no huddles, a lot of time. They're basically, if you look at the amount of plays, offensive plays that they run in a game, it's right up there with the top teams in the league in terms of most plays run. And the advantage of targeting teams that have those offenses that run very quickly, Philadelphia is another one. It's obviously more offensive plays, more opportunities to score fantasy points. It's an underrated tool that people perhaps don't look at, is how many offensive plays do these teams run. But there is also a lot of chop and change in the NFL. So you can only take this with a bit of a pinch of salt. But having said that, because Detroit run a lot of plays, they will run a lot of short yardage plays and in order to move the chains and to get this to go effectively. Because if you keep chucking the ball all the way downfield all the time, that takes time to move the chains, or running incompletion and then reset the huddle and reset the line and go from there. So, they will use both backs. my thinking is that Montgomery's going to be the downhill runner. He's going to be the goal line back, like similar to Jamal Williams. I don't think he's going to get anywhere near the touchdowns Jamal Williams got last year, but potentially he's someone who's going to get those goal line carries. He's that sort of back. So I do feel that there is good value of David Montgomery at where he is, especially if you're looking at a 1 RB approach in the first 3 or 4 rounds, and then you're looking those later rounds to stack a few RBs and hoping that 1 or 2 of those elevates. He's not a bad option to do that. I don't think he's going to be an RB1. I don't think he's going to be a high-end RB2. I think you're looking at a 16 to 24 finish is kind of his upside. But considering you start 2 RBs and he's going in the 8th, 9th round or later in drafts, that's pretty good value if we get a similar pattern of workload to what Jamal Williams was getting, but you have to adopt the touchdown regression in there. Based on last year's numbers, I'd say that Jamal Williams outperformed the touchdown number by just under 6 touchdowns. So he went, that would put him from 17 to closer to 11. I don't think David Montgomery's in the 11 range, but I would put him in this sort of 8, 9, maybe 10 range if he gets a similar workload to Jamal Williams last year. So I think if you can get a guy that late who's on course for the sort of 9, 10 touchdowns with decent yardage totals, I think he's worth a spin in a few leagues. I wouldn't be saying grabbing him in every league you can, but I'd be sprinkling and dabbling on him for sure. I certainly have in quite a few leagues.
I think you're spot on. I think in best ball it's an even better approach because
100%.
If you're going 1 RB and then you're taking a later round dive on a few players, if you can get those players right, and like Murph says, we're not looking for RB1 production here because that's unlikely unless an injury occurs. That RB2 production, you can bounce around the running backs you do draft later on, will pretty much not ensure, but there's a good chance you'll find RB2 production consistently by drafting a few later on. And with someone like Montgomery, if they do use potentially both backs at the same time on the field in a no-huddle situation, they've then got the option of Gibbs, Montgomery in the passing game, or Montgomery on the ground game to gain those short yardage. And the more plays they run, the better it is. And like Murph said, it's pretty much RB2 production unless something goes wrong. Those running backs, Murph, are on new teams. We look back to last year, wide receiver wise, the alphas, they changed teams. We saw it, AJ Brown in the draft, Devontae Adams leaves Green Bay, Tyreek Hill is off to the Dolphins after falling out with the Chiefs in contract talks there. And we were potentially, well, not potentially, but we did worry about production because of these new teams. And guess what? The studs are studs regardless of where they play. Was that a year an anomaly that year, or is that something we should perhaps look to less worry about in future years?
So statistically, an anomaly. We've talked about this before on this show many years ago when you and I were in a studio together. We talked about this misnomer that talent will prevail regardless. And we used many examples. OBJ, when he went to Cleveland, didn't do it. There are many examples of alphas that moved that did not work. In fact, it was very rare that an alpha would move and it did work. Last year, we got this unprecedented situation where you got 3 of the best wide receivers in the league all got traded at a very similar time, roundabout just before the draft, round free agency. AJ Brown was traded on draft night, on the first night of the NFL draft. These are unprecedented situations. They haven't happened before. We've never had this caliber of talent move at the rate that they did. I was less worried about Devontae Adams. He was going to a quarterback he was familiar with. He'd played with him before. There was always going to be less risk there with someone like Devontae Adams. But with Tyreek Hill and AJ Brown, there was absolutely risk here with those 2 players, with quarterbacks that hadn't necessarily lit the NFL alight in their time. They were quite young quarterbacks, still are quite young quarterbacks, hadn't really established themselves at the time. And, Tyreek Hill was moving on from Patrick Mahomes.
Yeah.
So we naturally thought there might be an arrow down from a volume perspective and also a velocity perspective, because Tua Tagovailoa does not have the same arm as Patrick Mahomes. No, heck, no one does. There's not a slight on Tua in any state or form. So there was major concern on what Tyreek would do, and there was a small dip, not a huge one, but what he lost in air yards is what he gained in volume, and became a huge target volume, and still put up wide receiver 1 numbers. AJ Brown just absolutely took off, was in an offensive situation that absolutely suited his skill set. Jalen Hurts went on one of the largest growths from a quarterback year to year that we've seen in recent times, and really elevated his play beyond, I think, anybody's wildest expectations.
Mm-hmm.
But in both those instances, they definitely delivered. AJ Brown especially smashed his ADP. The question is, talent should prevail. We haven't really had a majorly talented wide receiver. DeAndre Hopkins is the exception to this. He's gone from Arizona to Tennessee. Personally, it's a better offense. Should get an arrow up if he's healthy and ready to do it. Do I think he's in the wide receiver 1 conversation? No, but I do think he's a wide receiver 2, and I think it is ADP. He's kind of valued accordingly. I wouldn't say he's a value. I wouldn't say he's a reach. I think he's valued at what he can do. But some people are reaching to take him, hoping he becomes that wide receiver 1. I'm not sure I'm gambling on Ryan Tannehill, Will Levis situation enough to want to grab him too much beyond his cost. But I get it if you're looking to try and think of a wide receiver in that range that could smash beyond ADP, and you think it's that guy, then you've got to go get your guy, as we said last week. So,
what about Calvin Ridley on that sort of vein of thought?
That's true. It's a hard one. I kind of forget about Calvin Ridley because he's not played for 2 years. Because there was the injury and then the betting situation where he was banned for a year. So it's kind of hard because he technically didn't move this year. He moved last year with the betting scandal.
No, he didn't.
Is that right?
He
moved this year. He was supposed to move to Philly last year, and then that got broken down. They were literally in talks, and then the ban came down, and that ended talks, and then that's why AJ Brown went to Philly. But Calvin Ridley was the guy that he were going to trade for. And I have that on very good authority that was what was going on. So you're right. He did move this year. In terms of moving this year, you would expect it's a hard one. He's not played for 2 years. At his ADP, he is a gamble. He's a gamble I like in certain leagues. But he is a gamble because he could absolutely smash it. The talent is there. 2 years out of the NFL is a long time. And it's not just 2 years out of the NFL. It's 2 years out of the NFL with a new team, a new system. There's a lot of depth there. But again, Doug Peterson likes to get the ball downfield. He likes field stretchers. They've got a lot of talent. They've got Christian Kirk, who they paid a lot of money to. You got Zay Jones. You got Agnew. You got some real talent. You've got ETN, who'll be involved in the passing game. You've got Evan Ingram, who's just been paid. So you've got a few guys there who all have targets. So there'll be a lot to go around. There's a lot of mouths to feed, but I think Ridley will do well. I think it's a difficult one because of how long he's been out. And I think he's someone who I can see starting slow and then buying, the London games and beyond, thinking absolutely smash it. But it also wouldn't shock me if he had a pretty middling low end wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 season, just while he takes some time to settle into playing in the NFL again.
So my major concern with Calvin Ridley is his year off of playing football for his suspension isn't the same as a year off football when you're injured. He wasn't allowed to the facility, I don't think. He's basically been away from the game for the whole time. Yeah. But I then saw some footage of his training recently where, have you seen the footage of him and Christian Kirk running the same route?
Yeah.
And Christian Kirk runs it, he hits his brake and cuts across, and it's decent, the footwork's good. And then Calvin Ridley runs the same route, and it's as if Christian Kirk was in half speed. Calvin Ridley was almost Pee-wee versus NFL speed, and it was mind-bendingly fast. So if Calvin Ridley has missed the step, according to that one video, and I know it's only one video and you shouldn't base any of your thing on one training video, but holy moly, he's still fast and he's still in and out.
Absolutely. But it takes time. And you've raised a good point there, because you've got a player in Calvin Ridley who is significantly quicker than Christian Kirk. And that's going to take time for quarterback and wide receiver to get adjusted to that. When you're used to throwing the ball to Christian Kirk, Agnew, Zay Jones, these three guys are not rapid. They're not slow, but they're not breaking speed quick. And then all of a sudden you've got a guy who is a speedster. And I can relate this example, probably people are going to moan at this example, to when Deshaun Jackson landed in Tampa. And you end up having a guy like Mike Evans, big body receiver, wins a lot of 50-50s on the perimeter. You've got, inside receivers who, again, very good receivers, not overly quick. Jameis Winston could always struggle to find Deshaun Jackson. You always overthrew him or underthrew him because they couldn't get the timing right on the pace. Now, part of that was the Bucs offensive line wasn't great. It didn't give Jameis the time to really settle at times. And he lost his confidence, and then he just absolutely Jameis did what Jameis does and threw a lot of picks. But ultimately, they really struggled to get on the same page. And there were times that Jameis would overthrow him or underthrow him because he either over-anticipated the pace or he under. And that takes time to get used to as a relationship. It's all about time. It's like dancing. You have to learn the moves of your partner, the cadences. And I think when you've not played for 2 years and you're out of that rhythm, that takes time to get going. And I think, and then you've got to build that relationship. Ridley and Lawrence aren't going to have a lot of time in reality to get used to that. So I do think first few weeks of the season could be a little rough. I think the Jags might stick to what they know. But I think they will bring Ridley along. And I think Ridley, by, again, the London games, I don't think it's going to take long. He's a quality receiver. I think I'm talking about a month, 4 weeks, 5 weeks maybe. But I think by then, gets to the London games, we can start to see Ridley really starting to break out and put up some big numbers down the stretch.
Well, let's hope so, for the sake of everybody going to the London games. So we've talked about the veterans. Let's talk about the rookies and younger wide receivers. Whilst they might have started slow, if the talent was there, then they're going to hit their ceiling. They're going to, we've seen it with Wilson, Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, Christian Watson. This year's draft class with Jackson Smith and Jigba, Jordan Anderson, Quentin Johnston. I think I'm forgetting one. Do we think we'll see that sort of production again this year from the rookies coming in?
Never say never, but they've all fallen. Let's look at the situations. Garrett Wilson came into a situation where he was the clear wide receiver one. Chris Olave walked into a situation where he walked into one of the worst wide receiver rooms in the NFL and was the clear wide receiver one when Michael Thomas went down. Christian Watson moved into one of the worst wide receiver situations in the NFL where he was clearly the one or the two. It wasn't going to take much to dispute that. He was in a battle with Alan Lazard, who isn't exactly what we call a talent demon here. So, those guys landed in absolute dream spots to completely crush it. This year, not necessarily the case. So you look at it. So Jackson Smith and Jigba, I think for me, lands in the worst situation for this year of the rookie wide receivers, because you've got Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf, and I don't think that offense it doesn't sustain three wide receivers. I could be wrong, but I don't see how that offense sustains three wide receivers. And I think because Lockett's on his last year, he's highly effective. I can't see, and also he's a very different type of receiver to JSN. I don't see where Lockett's going to lose targets, truth be told. So I don't see where JSN gets these huge target numbers this year. Now, when Lockett, I expect Lockett to move on after this year. I think they'll retool that offense. I think DK Metcalf might change his role slightly. He's more dynamic than JSN in those regards, more flexible. Then I think there's definitely a role. And they've drafted him for a reason. They clearly have a plan what they're going to do. I just don't see JSN being a huge grab for me in redraft this year. I don't see where these big numbers are going to come from. I don't see him taking too much away from Lockett. So he's only going to eat into DK Metcalf. And I don't think
the situation with the others is pretty much exactly the same. They've got 3 wide receivers now with the Chargers.
Slightly different, I would say, in the sense of, let's go with the Chargers. The Chargers obviously have 2 great receivers in Keenan Allen and Mike Williams. Listen, Mike Williams always goes down at some point. He's going to get injured. It's almost a sure thing. But Quentin Johnston is a very different type of receiver. And Keenan Allen's getting on a bit as well. These are the other factors. So I think it's going to take a while for Quentin Johnston to get going, but I think Quentin Johnston will get going this season. I think you will see some numbers from him, especially, as I said, when Mike Williams goes down. That's a horrible thing to say, but it happens every year, so you might as well start baking into it. The one I expect to probably get going quickest is Jordan Addison. Now, he's got this little issue with, say little issue, I shouldn't belittle it, with speeding. I believe they're going to have to deal with that issue, and I don't know if he gets suspended for that, but I think after what happened with Henry Ruggs, I think you're going to have to be a little careful, NFL, from an image perspective, when you've got someone going, I don't know what he was going, 60, 70 miles over the speed limit. He was going a very significant amount over the speed limit. And given what happened to Henry Ruggs in that accident, that unfortunately 2 people lost their lives, and he's likely to go to prison for a period of time as a result of that. Maybe the NFL make an example, maybe they don't. There's another player who also has been fined for speeding. This is something that the NFL are going to have to make an example of. They might not do it on Jordan Addison. They might just keep it as is. And if they do, then fine. But I don't know. I'm not sitting here with any intelligence that he's going to get a ban, but it's something to keep an eye on. But he's in a situation where his competition for targets is Justin Jefferson, and that's it. Now, Justin Jefferson, as one of the elite wide receivers in this league, is going to get a lot of double coverage. It's going to leave Jordan Addison open in quite good situations. You've got an excellent offensive-minded coach in O'Connell there, who has a propensity to throw the ball more. People are still in this mindset that Minnesota run the ball a lot. They don't. They pass the ball a lot more. You saw Justin Jefferson move into this semi-Cooper Kupp-ish role, but slightly more advanced and more vertical than Cooper Kupp runs. So they will need a complementary piece, and O'Connell is part of that. Rams offensive coordinator, when he's part of that Rams offensive coordinator, he had weapons like Robert Woods, for example, and used them to great effect. Robert Woods was a very highly effective receiver there. So I expect Jordan Addison to be, he's someone who's going to be capped as a result of Justin Jefferson, but I think he's going to be highly productive. And that's an offense that can easily sustain both those wide receivers from a good volume perspective. So of the rookies this year, he's the one for me that definitely speaks of the most interest and the one that I'm more inclined to want a piece of. But at ADP, it's a popular opinion. I think he's the highest rated wide receiver rookie off the board, and rightfully so. So I don't think that any of them will probably smash what the guys did last year. But having said that, I think that, Addison's in a good situation. Johnston's in a good situation at some point this season. JSN, I think, is more the dynasty play. Expect more out of him next year than this year.
Is the lesson then to not jump on what happened last year with these rookie wide receivers? Obviously, we all know their situation it is worse. So we shouldn't expect the same production. But recency bias, we all get involved with in drafting. And when there's an option of a veteran we know's who production or these shiny rookies, don't get concerned with what happened last year because of situation. Choose the veteran we know whose situation is better, right?
Sort of. I would say the other piece on this is around the Groupthink at the moment is take wide receivers. They're safer. They're safer picks than running backs. Easier to predict, less volatility, especially in PPR. PPR eliminates the volatility of these wide receivers because you can just anticipate volume hogs who are going to have very, very safe floors. So as a result, it becomes much easier to pick wide receivers higher up the board than ever before. And there's a lot of very, very good receivers. We're seeing drafts now where 3, 4 5 wide receivers are going in the first round in the last couple of years. And we've seen what has traditionally been up until probably 2020, rookie wide receivers taking a long time to get going, and now all of a sudden absolutely smashing it in their rookie years. And people are expecting the same again. I think at some point it will plateau slightly simply because of the high volume of receivers and the situations that they're in. As I said, we're in a situation where this wide receiver pool is probably at one of the deepest it's been in history. And at the same point with the wide receiver position, I think once you go past, and I said this last week, 15 to probably 20, 22 wide receivers in, it really plateaus. So the difference between like the wide receiver 20 and the wide receiver 40 is very minimal. It's very minimal. We're talking about 20, 25 points over the season. It's not going to be a lot, which when you factor it over a game, it's at most 2 points a game. Not even that.
When you think about it that way, then it makes exploiting the points differences at other positions even more important, because when you, especially into leagues where you've got 3 wide receivers, once you get to that 20, like you say, 20-ish mark and beyond to 40, they're all a much of a muchness. So if everybody's plugging them all in, you might as well remove that slot from everybody's roster, because you know that, like you say, between scoring on that week, it's going to be around 2 to 3 points. So if everybody's scoring that in their wide receiver 3, you need to exploit that by getting a wide receiver 2 into your wide receiver 3 slot, or excelling at drafting elsewhere, right?
Either that or pivoting in drafts. So looking at the other positions where you can exploit and get the value. So for me, if you're in a league with 3 starting wide receivers, that starting wide receiver 3 spot will be much of a muchness unless you've either overdrafted at the top of the board, or you've managed to find an anomaly, a player that is going to smash ADP and smash its points value, which is very, I wouldn't say common, but it's possible. So I think for me, it's about where do you find value is, as you say, I would almost sort of write off that wide receiver 3 spot, knowing I can get a guy 3 rounds later who's going to produce a very similar sort of points value to where the consensus is taking their wide receiver, quote unquote, wide receiver 3. And especially those middle round receivers, there's just so much of a muchness that I'm almost tempted to wait on that and then try and hit a guy late on. There's some real late round guys. Adam Thielen, for example, is someone who could massively who could fall into that range as a wide receiver 3, given he's got very little target competition, and you're going to get him 4 rounds under, 5 rounds under what maybe some other people's wide receiver 3s are going to be, and he's someone who will fall in a very similar points range. He might fall 15, 20 points short. Ultimately, it's just not enough of a points difference maker in a lineup spot. The only difference is if you've got some of those wide receiver 3s who spike, those spikes might lead you to wins. In this instance, I'm thinking of someone like maybe Mike Evans, who's someone who can go, he could have a stat line of, 6 for 120 and 3 or 120 and 2, for example, and have a huge spike, 20-point week, 30-point week, and then do nothing for 4 weeks. And that's something that Mike Evans does from time to time. As opposed to drafting someone who might be like an Adam Thielen, who might just put up a 6 for 69 kind of point week, and then because of his history in touchdowns, you're banking on him getting in the end zone 7 to 10 times in the season to elevate him into that wide receiver 3, high end wide receiver 3 status. So, those are the sorts of advantages where you could make a pivot play and move on to someone else. But you also have these other rookies that are really interesting, like Rashee Rice, like Marvin Mims, who have walked into very interesting situations. These second round receivers are ones that are getting a lot of love in drafts, that are quite a way down in redraft boards, that I think fall into this exciting range of, if you're playing in a 3 wide receiver league and you're sitting here and people are taking the Mike Williamses of this world and that sort of range of ADP of 50, 60, the Mike Evans is, who I think is a massive down value this year. Mike Williams, players in that sort of ADP range. I exclude Tyler Lockett. I think he's a value, but that's the sort of range we're looking at. But there's a few others in that sort of range, wide receiver wise. that you could fade potentially, and look at these guys like Rice, like Mims, where they are ambiguous situations, but you're gambling and you're hoping that these guys could potentially turn out. Like for me, both those guys are in situations where they could usurp what's on the depth chart. You got to remember that Peyton isn't married to Cortland Sutton. He's not married to Judy. I think Judy remains the alpha. But Cortland Sutton, I think, is someone who could be at risk of losing targets to someone like Marvin Mims. Rice, there's no one on that roster that I think is particularly nailed on to get high volume from a wide receiver perspective because they've all gone. Kadarius Toney, injury prone, hasn't really delivered his first round status in the NFL. We're looking at the other receivers on that roster. Sky Moore, he had flashes last season. Could be decent. Could be the guy that elevates out of there. But that situation's so ambiguous. If you get the right guy in KC, you're off to a flyer. And it could be Justin Ross, who is a real late round sleeper. He's getting a lot of hype.
You know, Justin Ross. I'm thinking of the other
John Ross.
John Ross, he retired, didn't he?
Who just retired,
Talking of the Mims situation, obviously, I follow a lot of Broncos stuff on social media, and it's just absolutely flooded with reports that Judy's getting traded. And then Tim Patrick has just torn his Achilles and is out for the season. So Marvin Mims went from being drafted in the third round. Third round? Yeah, they moved back into the third to get him, or into the second. Third.
End of the second.
Did they move? Yeah, I think you're right. Actually, end of the second. But yeah, he was drafted. They moved back into whichever round it was to get him because Peyton clearly wanted his guy. Yet he was going to be behind Sutton, Judy, Patrick, who everyone expected big things from, and lo and behold, he's injured again. Bless him. If Judy gets traded,
end of the second, pick 63.
Well, there you go. Peyton wanted him, and we went and got him. It's one of those things where all of a sudden, Cortland Sutton and Marvin Mims, their ADP could massively, massively be cheap if Judy's traded and Patrick's injured. Because otherwise, there is no one else then. And as bad as Russ was and has been today at practice, it's going to be one of those things where their ADP is so cheap because there's no one else. Your mic is on, Murf. I can hear you. I don't know if Murf can hear me. He can hear me. You're back in the room. Love it. That's all right. I saw you. Did you smash your mic over like some sort of warlord?
No. It just came undone.
I just saw it in your hand and thought you'd given it a good
clout. I think the lead came slightly loose and it just muted everything. So apologies. So I didn't hear any of that either.
I was just talking about how Mims' situation and Cortland Sutton's ADP value could be extremely cheap if there's no one else on the roster and they are pretty much the only two wide receivers.
Yeah. And this is what I mean. So again, I think there's so much value at wide receiver late on. I mean, you got guys like Matt Collins who are being undrafted, who I think is a huge value. Someone I'll be taking in the last round of every redraft if I can, because he's wide receiver 2. There's no competition he's facing competition from Kyle Pitts, who hasn't really smashed it in the NFL as of yet, and Drake London. So he's going to get a role. He's smashing it in preseason, in camp. He looks good. He's got no competition behind him. They literally, if you go and look at the Falcons depth chart, it might be one of the worst depth charts in history. There's just so many. In fact, I'm going to pull it up because I've got to read you the names. It's just dreadful.
But all aboard Bijan, right? Let's get that running back in the first round and not build on a roster.
Well, I think they've done a decent job. I quite like their roster, especially on the back, like defensively, they've definitely improved. These are the players that they've got at wide receiver. Okay, so you've got Drake London, first round pick last season, fine. Mac Hollins is going to be the starting right-sided wide receiver. They've got Scotty Miller, who used to play on the Bucks. He was a late sixth round. He's the speedster. So he's the guy who's not going to get a huge amount of volume. He's almost like in that D-Jack's going to absolutely run the seam and be your sort of deep threat, which is also what Drake London can do. So bit of duplication there. This is the guys behind them. So Frank Darby, Kadarius Hodge, Penny Hart, JJ Arcega-Whiteside.
Tight end.
Well, who knows what he is anymore? He's listed here as a third choice wide receiver. Kalarian Harris, Josh Alley, Slade Bolden. I mean, you're talking about here, and there's just no real pedigree. You've got Matt Collins isn't even a strong wide receiver too. You're talking about Drake London and a bunch of guys. It's like the replacements out there. It's really, 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 really thin at wide receiver. So when you come to that status of it, you have to look at it and say that Matt Collins is going to usurp. He's going to get volume because there isn't anyone else on the roster that's going to get volume. This is you had people like Omalade Zacchaeus last year who was fantasy relevant for certain weeks, but they just kept rotating that position. If Matt Collins starts well, he'll earn some targets through the season. He's someone who in the last round could just be added some value, and if he doesn't, then you can just bin him. He's cost you nothing.
Yeah, absolutely. We spoke last week, Murph, about how for the first time in a couple of years, Travis Kelce in the first round might actually be a hindrance to your team as opposed to helping and being that star-studded all tight end. And whilst he is still that tight end you want, it is literally you draft him and build a team around him, or you just wait on tight end right now, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, there's still this case of people taking Mark Andrews. But yeah, I still argue the case of these middle tight ends are really the ones that are going to cause you some problems. If you continue to draft middle tight ends, you're better off waiting. There's enough guys late on who will produce value because it is Travis Kelce or bust really at tight end. That's what we said last year. That's kind of how it played out. You had some really random names sneak into the tight end one conversation. The thing is, Travis Kelce was so far ahead of everybody else at the position last year that he returned his ADP in his own right that way. He's going in the mid-first now. I think the only challenge to drafting Kelce is from a roster construction perspective. You get such a significant advantage at the tight end position, you are going to lose a spot somewhere else. And I think you have to draft well. And we'll get onto the vertical board, horizontal board stuff soon. But you're going to have to really smash your draft to really pay that off. For example, if you started tight end, running back, I think you're going to struggle. If you start tight end, wide receiver, running back, or tight end, running back, wide receiver, I think you might do okay. But then where'd you get the quarterback? And you're kind of playing around behind everyone else to get that advantage at tight end. And it's going to have to really pay off for you in the other positions. You're going to have to nail those positions. If you're able to draft an RB1 in the RB1 slot, an RB2 in the RB2 slot, a wide receiver 1 in the wide receiver 1 slot, a wide receiver 2 in the wide receiver 2 slot, and you've got Travis Kelce, and you can get a top 5, top 6 quarterback, then I would say, yeah, you've drafted well, you're golden, you're in good spot. But typically when people do the Travis Kelce build, they miss on the RB1 in the RB1 slot or the wide receiver 1 in the wide receiver 1 slot, and then they're behind the 8 ball. And then you kind of relying on waiver wires and owning the rest of the league in order to catch up. So that is the risk of drafting Travis Kelce early. I'm not saying don't do it at all. I understand the concept. I understand the value of taking him. And I can advocate it as a strategy to a degree, but that you're just going to have to draft like a god. And really, you're going to have to understand how your opponent's going to draft. You're going to have to be one step ahead, because I think if you play to the rest of the board, I think you're going to be light in a key position. And you're also going to have to run good on injuries. You're going to need a lot of injury luck to go your way in order for that to be a viable strategy. But I don't think, from experience, if I look at the leagues who won last year, I don't think many of them had Travis Kelce on it. And again, that's not advocating it as a strategy, but you have to be aware that just because you're buying a significant advantage at a position, it is a position that has a low value. Yep. And at the same token, it's what you're substituting in the other positions and the net cost. And that's what people don't think. People think, okay, I've got Travis Kelce, I'm going to have a 150-point advantage at the tight end position. But you might be giving up 100 points at the running back position. You think, okay, I'm still net 50 points up. But if your running back position starts to deteriorate because you're thinner and you don't have as much depth, and then you get an injury or two, then you're really in trouble. So I think you've got to think about what it costs, and it's a significant cost to buy that advantage at the tight end position, and you're going to have to find a way to offset that cost.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. Murph, how long is it going to take you to summarize the points we've made in the last 2 podcasts? Or do we need a trifecta of podcasts for a summary podcast on the lessons of 2022?
No, I think I can summarize it. The only thing I've not got into too much is quarterback and offensive coordinator changes. So I can do those quickly. Quarterback landscape has changed. It's been changing the last few years. The strategy has been to take quarterbacks earlier because they do separate themselves. And then there's a point where that starts to fall off. And those middle range quarterbacks didn't really pay out last season, unlike Joe Burrow. This season, you've got Mahomes and Allen going in round 2. You've got Hurts going in round 3. You've got Burrow going in round 4. That's an expensive cost, similar to the Travis Kelce scenario. You're going to have to massively outdraft in the other positions in order to pay those costs. And again, I'm not advocating it as a strategy. I think drafting Joe Burrow in the 4th round is more palatable than drafting Josh Allen or Patrick Mahomes in the 2nd round. But I understand that people will want to do that, and I can understand. Understand it as a strategy as well. Of taking those quarterbacks, having your locked quarterback, don't need to worry about a replacement. You just need to worry about the bye week, and the rest of it takes care of itself. There is, I think for me, those 4 guys are worth taking at their cost. If you can work out the opportunity cost and pay and offset that, I think with Joe Burrow, it's significantly less of an opportunity cost than the others, and therefore easier to work out and easier to do. But having said that, quarterbacks might fall slightly later. If those quarterbacks fall into the 3rd round, again, it becomes easier to offset the cost of Mahomes, Allen, and Hurts, for example. The later they go, the easier it is to take those players. The one player I would say outside of those 4 that I would be happy to take in the mid rounds is Lamar Jackson. We're talking about a guy who was a former QB1, former MVP. Yes, he's had some injury problems, but we know he's a cheat code. He has that Konami code, but he has that ability for those high-end finishes. So we know he's someone who's worth his weight. He's going in sort of like the 5th, 6th round. I think he's huge value there. Someone I'm happy to pay out for. Justin Fields going in a similar range, maybe a little bit actually earlier, depending on where you're drafting and the type of league that you're in. I'm less keen on Justin Fields, but again, I get the running ability, safe floor, put up decent points. So I can get that. I can get on board with him as a strategy. He's not a player I'm targeting too much because I think he's going slightly earlier than I would want, but I can understand people paying up for him for the safety and security at the position. There's guys falling late, falling lower, like Dak Prescott, for example, who has had okay but not great couple of seasons. And then you fall into this range of much of a muchness, the Trevor Lawrences, the Daniel Joneses, Kirk Cousins of this world, who all are good QBs in fantasy. They'll all do fine. They'll be your QB1s. And that's kind of the later round weight. You'll be fine getting one of those guys. But, Kyler Murray's the interesting one because he's now at a significantly lower cost because he's likely to miss time. How much time? How do you factor that in? Is he someone that you take as a second QB if he's still available, given the fact that he might only miss 2 to 4 weeks, and therefore you might have a QB1 production player at a QB2 cost? In a super flex option, he's definitely someone that's highly attractive because you're getting such a discount on him. You could end up taking your 2 QBs and then you've got Kyler Murray. So we don't know when he's back. There is a risk baked into his ADP, but I think his ADP is extremely attractive to snag a player like that. So I think you're in this scenario of those first four names, you have to decide if you want to pay the cost. If not, I think Lamar is the guy to target as the next level. And for some people, Fields, and I get that. And then if not, I'm waiting on the position and I'll build a tier and I'll just take one of the other guys because they're a bit of a muchness. You might get a separation of 30, 40 points. It's not enough to weight a guy 2-3 rounds over another guy. So I'd be quite happy to just take the risk and try and find a guy who might outperform his ADP. So that's QB. And I think people last year took too many of those mid-range QBs moving up and they didn't pay out as they should have done. So I think you either have to take the elite four at the position or look for the guys at ADP upside value or wait. Don't just think don't think there is 12 guys at the position that are worth the value of the first four. I think there's a clear separation between the first four, someone like Lamar Jackson who can bridge that gap, or the safety of someone like Fields, who I think is a top 6 QB, but I think he's the 5th or 6th QB, and you're buying the floor as opposed to buying a ceiling. But he could smash it. I don't see it, but he could. But you could be buying that safe floor. I'm just going to take the mid-range QB. He's fine. Sit and forget. Or you try and think of an alternative strategy and wait, as opposed to just reaching on these mid-range QBs and chasing the field. And the last one is OC changes. So, one of the things that people don't factor in is changes at offensive coordinator. Actually, let's probably do this in another show. Just because I think it's quite important, and I don't think I'm going to do it justice in 5 minutes, and I want to do the vertical board and horizontal board stuff. So I think actually it will give me some time to formulate opinions on the new OCs, the OC changes, and we can talk about offenses that are attractive and unattractive based on these OCs. Because I think last year it was a very good indicator of offenses that were going to be arrowed down. Chargers, for example. I had a feeling they weren't going to be quite as good in 2022 as they were in 2021 because of that offensive coordinator change. The Bills losing the ball is another example, but they did all right. But again, slight arrow down because of the level of quality that they've lost as a coach, and then who was going to elevate. And again, Packers with Hackett, etc. Versus who's going to take arrows up from changes to OC. So we'll do that in another show because I think that's quite an interesting topic, and I don't think I'll do it justice in 5 minutes.
Fair enough. Are you going to be doing the board today, or are you going to do that in
the
show?
I can do that because I do think that's something I can do in just over 5 minutes. Definitely no more than 10. So I definitely think I can do it. So we talked about this concept of the vertical board and the horizontal board, and it involves tiers. Now I'm going to use the Fantasy Pros website or mock draft simulator or draft wizard because I can do this very, very quickly, and it's an easy way for me to highlight the difference in a vertical board and a horizontal board. These are theoretical, but if you've not listened to the show that we did with Michael Lombardi, former 3-time Super Bowl GM, he kind of put me on to this concept because this is exactly how they draft in the NFL. They have a ranking of players by position, and then they have an overall ranking of all players. And then what happens is they formulate this vertical and horizontal board. So you have the vertical is by position. The horizontal is the ranking of all the players combined, or the alternative, depending on how you do it in the NFL. Maybe the vertical is the list of 1 to 260 players who drafted, or 263, or 264, and then the vertical or the horizontal is by the positions. So you go through all the quarterbacks, all the wide receivers. Obviously, in fantasy football, slightly easier. There's less positions to worry about. So just done this simple 2023 PPR 12 team. Going to draft from the 10 position. 1 QB, 2 running backs, 3 wide receivers, 1 tight end, 2 flex, just regular flex, no super flex, DST, and a kicker, right?
Murph, before you click into this, I should point out to the people listening,
Yeah.
Come and watch the video because Murph has it on the screen and is going to explain the process. If you only want to watch a little bit of the video because you have listened to the podcast, listen to the first hour of the podcast, then head over to YouTube or anywhere else where you can catch the video jump to exactly an hour, because we are at 1 hour 25 seconds, and that will draft you straight to the video that Murf is going to explain. And trust me, it will be much, much easier to watch it than listen to this.
Yes, but I will try and explain if you are heavily reluctant to do YouTube. So you can get, if you're listening to this in a car, so it does make some sense, and then you can go back and watch it later. All right, so just going to run the start. I'm not going to say all the picks because it's almost irrelevant, right? So we've had the first 9 picks. You can see Travis Kelce's actually come off the board. So now we're going to look at these position of tiers. So on the left-hand side here, it's the all button, which literally has every single player ranked by Fantasy Pros ECL. And they have here tier 2, tier 3, tier 4. So all the tier 1 players have gone. Now, this is all. So this is the vertical board. This is how they're ranking every single player in fantasy football. But then what I can do is go to these horizontal boards. And what I mean by that is looking at it by position. So I can see here I've got 3 quarterbacks here. Mahomes, Allen, Hurts. I can go to running back here, and I can see I've only got 1 tier 1 player here, which is Saquon Barkley. I've got wide receivers here. It's going a bit slow. And I've got 5 players in my tier 2. Diggs, Lamb, Brown, Adams, and St. Brown. These aren't my rankings. These are the ECR. I've got tight ends. I've got 2. I'm not going to go into kicker and DST. So when I'm sitting here thinking of this from a value perspective from my tiers or the tiers of the ECR, even though the Fantasy Pros consensus is telling me to take Stephon Diggs here, by my tiers, I've got 5 guys in the same tier, and I'm picking twice in the next 5 slots. So that is telling me that one of these guys is going to fall back to me, guaranteed. So if I've got them all in the same tier, is the value really taking Stephon Diggs here? Is that really the best play? Considering I've got Stephon Diggs, CeeDee Lamb, AJ Brown, Devontae Adams, and Amon-Ra St. Brown as similar values, according to this list.
In tier 2 as well. And let me remind people that the only tier 1 player left from the skill position is Saquon Barkley at running back.
Well, and the quarterbacks. So you could sit there and go with the quarterbacks. But going back to running back here, in my tiers, Saquon Barkley, well, in the tiers of the Fantasy Pros list, Saquon Barkley is ranked as the 3rd best running back. He, for me, from a value perspective, appears to be the best value. So he's the guy I would select, because he's the only guy in that tier 1 in that position. So now I come back to tier 2, come back to my next pick, and there's 4 running backs in tier 2: Nick Chubb, Derrick Henry, Ramondre Stevenson, or Josh Jacobs. But there's only 2 guys in the wide receiver tier, which is CeeDee Lamb and Devontae Adams. Now, the consensus is telling me to take CeeDee Lamb. I disagree with that. I'm going to take Devontae Adams from my personal rankings, even though this is slightly different from the rankings of the expert consensus. So I'm going to take Devontae Adams here because, again, you've got that shortness of position. So again, it's using that horizontal board of value at the position. So now we go back to the vertical board. So we've got 3 guys here in tier 4, which is Smith, Higgins, Metcalf, all wide receivers. Okay, so that's interesting. We can go via quarterback. All the tier 1s have gone. So we're not looking at quarterback here at the 310. We've got 2 running backs here, which is Aaron Jones and Jamar Gibbs at tier 3. So that's worth considering. Or I've got 3 wide receivers here in Devonta Smith, T. Higgins, or DK Metcalf. Or I can look at the tight ends. I've got a huge tier. So here, I'm not even thinking tight end here. I'm not thinking quarterback here. So it's looking at, is Aaron Jones a better value than maybe one of these 3 guys? And this is a tough decision because you've got 2 guys versus 3 guys. There's 5 picks. You're likely going to get 2 of these players at position. This is where my personal rankings would be slightly different. I wouldn't necessarily. The board here says Aaron Jones is a good pick here. I actually think T. Higgins is a better pick here. He's the guy I would probably take. So that's what we're going to do. And then we see what falls. And look, Aaron Jones is still there. And he's in a tier of his own. Or I've got DK Metcalf in a tier of its own. So now I'm sitting here. I've got one guy. I've got one guy in each, the running back or the tight end, running back or wide receiver position. The tight end position is stacked in tier, as is the quarterback position. So I think for balance, seeing the drop off in talent, I definitely think that Aaron Jones is the better pick here. So I'm going to take Aaron Jones.
I would have, excuse me, I would have taken Aaron Jones first there because I think of the, I would have preferred to have Aaron Jones and then a DK Metcalf, hoping that T. Higgins, ideally I would have had Aaron Jones and T. Higgins of that. And the fact you went Higgins over Jones, is a coin flip in which way you want to go safety. But the fact that Jones got back to you was pretty much the perfect situation there.
Yeah, and I think that's part of that is draft experience. Is I didn't think T. Higgins had a hope of getting back. I felt there was a chance that Aaron Jones would get back. So that's why we've gone there. And so now we're into the late fifth. So now we've got this tier of quarterbacks here: Justin Fields, Justin Herbert, Trevor Lawrence. I don't personally have Trevor Lawrence in this tier. So I've talked about this safety bit of Justin Fields. I actually haven't talked about Justin Herbert. He's someone that I quite like significantly. So there is an argument here to look at quarterback. We look at so if we look at the overall board, there's a huge tier 4 of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 players. But if we look at the actual horizontal side, the 3 quarterbacks, we've got 3 running backs in Connor, Mattison, and White. We've got 5 wide receivers here in Lockett, Johnson, or 6, Kirk, Pittman, Brown, Evans. I don't understand Marcus Brown is that high up, or Mike Evans, to be honest.
I can't quite see that, Murph. Are they tier 5 at this point?
Tier 5 at this point. Tier 4 running backs, tier 5 wide receivers. And we've still got all those tight ends. So again, tight ends an easy position to punt here. Unless you have Kittle as a significant up on all these players, which I don't.
Would this Murph be a point to look at the board and excuse me, quarterbacks? If we were thinking quarterback here, but the 2 teams after us already have a quarterback, this would be a good time to take a position that isn't a quarterback, right? Because then one of the quarterbacks should get back to us if they've both got a quarterback.
So both these teams need quarterback after us. So that's a very good point. So we look at the board. These teams need quarterback. Neither of these teams have drafted a quarterback. So if we do value Fields and Herbert over one of these, over Lawrence, for example, and let's say, for example, we only had Fields or Herbert in this field, then Fields would be a really good pick here at 5'10". Alternatively, we could gamble and see if they want to wait. But looking at the depth of position, it's likely one of these running backs will come back. It's certainly guaranteed that one of these receivers will come back and one of these tight ends. So, yeah, I think based on what you're saying, with the needs of quarterback here from the 2 teams behind and the likelihood that they could take them, I would say that Justin Fields is someone who's worth taking here.
Yeah, I think the play for us here is Justin Fields here and then hope Deontay Johnson gets back to us in the next. That would be my play. So
Deontay Johnson went, Waller went, Kirk went, White went. So now we're done at quarterback. We have 2 running backs here in James Conner and Alexander Mattison. We have 4 wide receivers here in Lockett, Pittman, Brown, and Evans. And we have a ton of tight ends. Still 5 tight ends. Now, people will be screaming here saying you should take George Kittle or Kyle Pitts. I still think all those are much of a muchness. I'm quite happy to wait at the position. I would say here, probably looking at Tyler Lockett, I would say he's I think here you could go either way. I could take the argument of James Conner being slightly over these players that are falling behind. At the same token, we've only got 2 starting wide receivers. We still got another starting slot to go. Be quite nice to get Tyler Lockett as a 3 because I think he outperformed.
And that's another good point, because it's 3 wide receivers. We should fill our squad here with what we know is is value at this point, rather than taking another running back for our flex when we need the wide receivers. And I think I think even David Montgomery or someone like that might come back at the next round because we know people are sleeping on him.
Oh, I think people like Kamara, Montgomery, Pacheco, I think all those players come back easily. Javonte Williams, who we've just received news is going to play this preseason. So I think all those. Well, I think some of those are going to come back. So anyway, I think we take Lockett, and then we see what comes off the board here. Okay, so it's good. There was a massive wide receiver run here, so we were right here. So in between when we picked, let's have a look. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 8 wide receivers came off the board. So we were 100% right because now we look at wide receivers. So let's go back to the vertical board. We've got a huge tier of 8 players, 9 players to pick from. But look at the wide receiver tier. It's huge.
Yep.
There's 11 players in this wide receiver tier. We go to the running back tier, again, also huge. We go to the tight end tier, thin. 2 tight ends. Pat Freiermuth and Evan Ingram. Now, having said that, one of the 2 teams behind us has picked a tight end, so we can wait one more round on tight end and go tight end next. If we've got both these guys pretty equal in our tier, and they're still tier 2, so we should be happy with either one. We know that one of these teams is not going to pick a tight end, so we can wait, pick up the last tight end, or have the choice of both. So now we have to think, do we want to pick one of these huge list of wide receivers, or do we dip back into the running back market? As you mentioned, David Montgomery's fallen back. Isaiah Pacheco has come back to us. James Cook has come back to us. I think for me in the tier, those 3, there's DeAndre Swift. He's not someone I'm too keen on. But maybe at this round, he's actually quite a good value because he's probably the lead back in a committee in Philadelphia. So I would say probably Swift here is actually not a bad value. I'd probably advocate to take him.
Interesting. Of Montgomery and Swift, I would prefer Montgomery based on what we saw from the Detroit running backs last year. And like we spoke about earlier, his touchdown regression will come. That Philadelphia running back committee scares the bejesus out of me.
Well, it did well for Miles Sanders last year.
I suppose. I think
they traded for him, so there's some value in him. I don't think he's an RB1, but I think he's a very safe RB2. And we're getting him in the late 7th. Okay. So I quite like the value you get here.
I would be happy with either, so I will go with your rankings genius over mine on this one.
I also think, there we go. So Montgomery went, Smith went, Daniel Jones went, Quentin Johnston went. So we actually still have the choice of tight ends. I'd be comfortable to pull the trigger at tight end here because we've got a ton of wide receivers in a tier, got quite a few running backs in a tier. I'm quite happy to go with Freiermuth or Ingram. I have them ranked pretty similar. The consensus has them ranked pretty similar.
I would, if of the 2, I'm going Ingram purely that he got paid.
Happy. Not going to get an argument with me there. So we go Ingram. So now we see what comes to us in the late 9th round. So we don't need to worry about tight end. The vertical board literally has 1 player in a tier here, which is Deshaun Watson, which is a bit, it's not a move for us given we already have a quarterback. So it's not a player we want. Then there's a huge tier 8 on the vertical board. Running backs here, we've got a tier of 6 players. Wide receiver, we've got a much bigger tier of 8, 9 players. Tight end, we don't really need to look at. So
with the running backs, Murph, with people who aren't looking, is that tier? What tier is that? Is that tier
3? Tier 5. Tier 5 running back. Tier 7 wide receiver. Because again, you got to remember, it's more wide receiver starting slots, and more wide receivers are coming off the board.
Absolutely.
So if we think of our team, we've pretty much filled our starting slots and a flex. So we've got 1 more flex to fill. But all the main starting slots are gone. So we have to look at this now and think we have this running back. We already have 3 running backs in a 2 running back slot. We don't have any cover at wide receiver, but I'm looking at this tier. And for me, all these players are very, except for the ones near the bottom, I think like Sky Moore, Darnell Mooney, Adam Thielen. I think some of these guys are massively overranked from rankings. And I think some of these would be a slight reach for me. If you're looking at like the ADPs of these players, like Darnell Mooney has an ADP of 163, could be deemed a reach. Sky Moore is a reach of 157. So these players should be expected to come back. We can look at the teams behind us. The teams behind us have drafted full complement of wide receivers. So they've got 3 wide receivers, so they could go another one. This team has drafted 3 wide receivers. And then it's the 2 in the flex. So we could look at actually what they've picked. So if we go to these teams, the team behind us has got 5 wide receivers on their roster, as has the other team behind us. So likely, because they've got 5 wide receivers already, they could go a 6th wide receiver. I think a lot of these guys could come back. And running back could be a position here that they're likely to take some backup at, or I would expect in the case of team 11, they'll take Deshaun Watson because he's the value on the board here. And then if we look at tight end, is there a tier break at tight end? No. So you might see a tight end come off the board here. You might not. I think I'm looking at this board. I would say someone like AJ Dillon or Brian Robinson Jr. would be the 2. I don't think Antonio Gibson is the lead back in Washington, so I'm a bit scared to take him here.
Do you not think Khalil Herbert is the lead back in Chicago?
No, I think it's Deontay Foreman personally, but I could be wrong. That's a personal choice.
Yeah,
I just think you don't go out and sign Deontay Foreman if Khalil Herbert's the lead back. So Samaje Perine's interesting. I don't think I'd take him here.
Especially I think Brian Robinson's the play for me here.
Yeah, I'm happy with Robinson. I could have been swayed onto Dillon, but because I do think they'll go to Dillon more. So as expected, the quarterback came off the board. Actually, the run on running backs came here. So actually, only 1 wide receiver came off the board. So that was good news for us because we still got the pick of everyone we want other than Sky Moore. All these guys are deemed an ADP reach. However, looking at our squad, we should probably ignore the fact it's an ADP reach, and we should look at the wide receivers here that we want to take and strengthen the squad further. I don't think we need tight end. I think we're pretty set at running back for a bit, unless we have a strong feeling that actually AJ Dillon's good value. We can go 5 running backs early, but I think that's probably a bit heavy. Having said that, is the value at wide receiver here, even though this is a huge tier. Are these, as we said earlier, these guys are all a bit of a much. Mind you, I'm looking at the next tier. Yeah, there is a little bit. I'd say for me, Mooney or Thielen. I'm not really feeling the rest of them. I think the rest of these all fall into a bit of a muchness. I like Zay Jones, but he's the 3.
Nope,
he'll get some work, but I don't really want him as our wide receiver 4. I think Mooney or Thielen outperform ADP.
I think Thielen outperforms ADP based on his pure red zone capabilities. That would be for me.
So this simulator is going to tell us off as a huge reach. I don't really care. I still think he's decent in that range. So we go to the vertical board. 5 players in the vertical board. Of these 5 players, 4 of them are quarterback. One of them is tight end David Njoku. I don't think we need quarterback here. We've got our quarterback. There's a huge running back tier: McKinnon, Mitchell, Akane, Wilson, Singletary, Algier, Mostert, Warren, Foreman's there, Miller, and Gainwell. Wide receivers, there's 1 player in tier, which is Michael Gallup. Tight end, there's 1 player there's a couple of players in tier actually. Njoku, Schultz, Dolcic, and Nkonkwo, Higbee, and Komet. It's interesting that on the overall board, Njoku is a tier above every other tight end, but in the tight end tiers, he's in the same tier as everyone else. I don't quite know how that works. But anyway, I would advocate for Gallup here.
Yep, fine.
He's in a tier on his own. The value is to take Gallup here as our wide receiver 5. So now we've got this huge tier of wide receivers. I mean, it's still more it's a huge tier of 21 players. And this is what I mean by much for much as a wide receiver.
Yep.
I wouldn't have a 21 player tier personally. Running back tier is significantly smaller. The tight end tier has got 5 players in it.
Should we be looking at I was going to say the New Orleans rookie, but Jamal Williams is there based on the news that Alvin Kamara should receive a suspension.
So the vertical board has 4 quarterbacks in a tier of their own. I don't think we need to take a quarterback here, given that we've got Fields. So we look at running back. We've already got 4 running backs. We've got 5 wide receivers. Yeah, I mean, you can kind of toss up which way you want to go here. There isn't anyone that's screaming at me as a... I mean, if I'm sitting here, I could make a case for Donta Foreman as I think he could be the starter.
My only concern with Donta Foreman as the starter is we already have Justin Fields, and do we want to tie ourselves too much to the Chicago run game with a running back and a quarterback?
Well, they're more likely to run the ball than throw the ball.
Okay,
that's how I would advocate it. I could make a case for Dalton Schultz as a second tight end, but I think it's a little early for a second tight end. But I could argue that case. I don't feel that great about Jerick McKinnon. I think he's in line. I wrote about him for significant touchdown regression. I think he's due 3 or 4 touchdown regression this year based on his usage. I don't feel good about Elijah Mitchell from an injury perspective, and he's a 2. I don't feel good about Hunter Renfrow. I could make a case for Foreman. I could make a case for, if I'm looking at this huge wide receiver tier, if we wanted to go there, Robert Woods as the 1 in Houston. I could make a case for
Collins.
Pardon?
For Nico Collins.
Yeah, I don't think Nico Collins is the 1.
Well, seeing as it is a 3 wide receiver, and you think he's going to be the 1, let's take your boy Robbie Tree.
But I think he comes back. If you look at how many guys are ranked above him, I'd say both Foreman and Woods potentially come back, but I think you could go either way.
Okay, well, let's go Foreman Woods. That would be my play here.
So let's see what happens. Yeah.
Come on, Woodsy.
So Robert Woods did come back. The Fantasy Pros consensus hates it, which is great. This is about going against groupthink, so we've done this magically in this draft. Kenneth Gainwell was in a tier of his own, but given that we've got Swift, I'm not too keen on taking his third backup or second backup behind Penny. So
I don't think we deviate from the plan here, and I think we just punch Robert Woods.
I'm with you.
See what comes back.
See what we got told off by Fantasy Pro saying he'd be there 2 rounds from now. I don't really care because we're looking at how we're building this team. We've got 3 picks left. We don't have a backup quarterback, which I'm actually quite comfy with, given the fact that we've got a set and forget QB with a 13-week bye. So I don't feel like we need to take another QB. Because we'll pick one up the waiver wire. I don't think you need to worry about taking a second QB. If Fields goes down, you're dead anyway. So, and look at the QB still on the board. Prescott to Cousins. I mean, I might change my mind if these guys are back and punt kicker. But I think we're in the range now where we can consider. There's literally, if we look now at the horizontal, so the vertical board has still those 4 QBs. The horizontal board has the Dallas Cowboys DST in a tier of their own. That's an interesting play 2 rounds out. We could look at another wide receiver. There's a huge tier to pick from. I don't know if everyone's there rated at like 1%. They're all most of them are likely to fall back to us. We do have quite a lot of picks before our next pick. So, or we can go tight end. We don't have a backup tight end, so someone like Greg Dulcich here, or Chig. Depends how you feel about Tennessee. I think both those guys could be a decent play. The only thing we've got to worry about is bye week, because Evan Engram's got a week 9 bye, and Greg Dulcich has a week 9 bye.
I like a Okonkwo here as our second tight end.
Yeah. I'm quite happy to punt. I'd rather have him over Higbee as our backup, because I think let's shoot for the moon. He could be amazing. I'm okay with that as a backup tight end. So I think we snag him here. So we take Chig, and then again using the vertical horizontal board. If we wanted to go, so if we look at quarterbacks here, Tua. I tell you what, Tua is interesting here because I think he's significantly better than Rodgers and Goff.
Yeah,
and we could punt kicker and just take a DST. We've got 5 DSTs in the same tier, which is Chiefs, Steelers, Saints, Dolphins, Bengals, and we're picking in 5 picks.
Yeah, I'm quite happy to go Tua here and play the upside.
Yeah, I think if something happens to Fields, you've got Tua, then your season doesn't tank. We can punt kicker, not take one. The simulator's going to hate it. I don't really care. I'm not really caring about what the grade's going to kick out here. Chiefs, Steelers, or Bengals. This is the easiest decision in the world to me. I'm keen to hear what you say before I select.
Of those 3 DSTs?
Yeah.
Oh, I feel like the answer should be blatantly obvious, but yeah, I don't know it. Gosh. Are we taking this purely based on week 1 matchup or...
No, I'm taking this based on historical rankings of this team is always consistently up there in historical rankings from a DST perspective. I look at consistency.
It's got to be the Steelers here then.
100%.
Okay.
I'm just going to see. I know last year they weren't particularly great.
Because TJ Watt was injured.
Well, I still don't think they were bad. I'm just looking up historically where they were. So last year they were 16th. Not a great year for them. Year before. Oh, sorry, that was 2021. 2022 they were 12th. 2020 they were second. 2019 second. 2018 12th. So 4 top 12 finishes in the last 5 years. There's the Chiefs and the Bengals. Not always the case. Let's take the Steelers. We're going to get a really bad ranking. Oh, hey, mine. I'll take that. 92 out of 100. I'm taking that all day long, especially as we haven't taken a kicker.
And there you go.
I'm all right.
That's how a vertical and horizontal board gets you an A- on Fantasy Pros.
Well, also, right, I just want to go through this group thing, right? Let's look at teams that drafted. Again, we've gone well over. I thought this might take 10 minutes. But no one's really followed only us and Team 12. The last 3 teams actually followed the same strategy: 2 running backs and a wide receiver. No one else followed that. Got a couple of wide receivers, a couple of running backs. Sorry, 2 wide receivers, running back each. Each of the last 3 teams. You got a couple of teams that didn't take wide running backs till like the 5th round. You got a couple of teams that just smashed wide receiver or tight end. You got teams that took lots of running backs. So the good thing is there's a good spread here in terms of what teams did. I feel like we've got good balance in our team. I feel like that's why we've got a pretty decent score. So I'm quite happy with what we did. 92 out of 100. Without a kicker, which will score us down quite significantly.
Hey, look, we got the second best team according to the rankings here. And...
yeah, we're not far off first. And again, I think because we didn't take a kicker. So yeah, I'm quite happy with that. Matt Harmon likes our draft. Derek Brown hates our draft. If Derek Brown hates our draft, and I love Derek, he's a good friend. I'm all right with that. Matt Harmon likes our draft, so I'm all right with that. So yeah, cool. That's the horizontal and vertical board. I think we picked some good players. We picked a decent team, but I think we showed, more importantly, why you do the horizontal and the vertical draft and why you do all these separate tiers. And if you want to know how to do tiers, you can do tiers without doing rankings. and happy to go through an episode where you do that if you're struggling with rankings and how to do it. So
there you go.
I hope that was useful.
Absolutely. I think it was massively. And
it was 30 minutes, which I wasn't expecting.
If you want to come over for a 5-minute video, then you can head over to YouTube for pretty much a half an hour feature length.
I think because I was trying to make it audio friendly as well by giving as much detail.
Absolutely.
I might do a shortened 5-minute video on it in the future.
Well, we will see. We will see. But I think it worked well. That is going to do it for today, Rush Nation. We will be back with offensive coach changes because Murf thinks that's very important. There's some news coming back in. Dan Campbell sees the Lions backfield as a two-headed monster. Tell us something we didn't already know, Dan.
Good. He's listened to the pod. He's like, these guys are talking up David Montgomery. Got to see. Me and Campbell, we're like this. We are
in. Rush Nation, if you fancy supporting the podcast, head over to patreon.com/5yard rush. There's a few tiers over there. If you want to throw some coffers into our pot to help the pod move forward, we would massively appreciate that. And don't forget, we are sponsored again by Manscaped, so there will be a code for 20% off and free shipping coming very, very soon. If you want to get yourself the 4.0 lawnmower and keep that body trimmed to the max, follow the podcast on Twitter at 5yard rush. You can follow Murf at Murf_NFL. The NFL is in capitals. I don't know if that makes any. It's not Twitter anymore. It's X or some absolute BS.
It's on X. That. Yeah, can't call it the Twitter machine anymore. It's the X-rated machine.
Is all sorts of wrong in itself. And that's it for another week. We'll be back next week, Murf, same time, same place, Thursday night. You take care of yourself, Rush Nation. As always, don't forget, keep rushing.
Hey everyone, Scott Hansen here from NFL Red Zone. I hope you're checking out 1 hour of 5 Yard Rush, one of the best podcasts on